He told me no man would ever want me as he threw my suitcase onto the driveway. Said I was lucky he'd tolerated me for as long as he did. That I should be grateful he'd given me a roof over my head. That at 34, with no career and no prospects, I was essentially worthless. 3 months later, my ex-husband walked into a company gala and saw me on the arm of Richard Morrison, his CEO, his boss, the man who controlled his entire career. And when Richard looked my husband in the eye and said, "You threw away the most valuable thing you'll ever have," I finally understood that my worth was never defined by the man who couldn't see it. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. I want to hear from this community because what you're about to witness is a journey from broken to unbreakable. Hit subscribe if you believe the people who discard you are always shocked when someone else sees your value. The marriage had been dying for years, but I hadn't wanted to see it. Elena Martinez, devoted wife, dedicated homemaker, the woman who'd given up her career as a graphic designer to support her husband's ambitions. That's who I'd been for 9 years. Who I thought I was supposed to be. David Torres came home late on a Thursday in November, his tie already loosened, that familiar tightness around his mouth that meant he'd had a bad day and was looking for someone to blame. I was in the kitchen finishing dinner, like I did every night. Roasted chicken, his favorite. Potatoes seasoned exactly how he liked them. The table set, candles lit, trying to create something warm in a home that had grown cold. "You're still here," David said, and something in his tone made me turn from the stove. "What do you mean?" "I live here. For now." He set his briefcase down with deliberate care. "Elena, we need to talk." Those 4 words. The ones that change everything. I turned off the burner and faced my husband, my hands gripping the counter behind me for support I somehow knew I'd need. "I want a divorce." The words landed like stones. I'd known things were bad, yes. We barely spoke anymore except in logistics and criticism. He worked late most nights. When he was home, he was on his phone. We hadn't had a real conversation in months. Hadn't been intimate in longer than that. But hearing it said aloud still felt like the ground opening beneath me. "David, please. We can work on this. Marriage counseling or I don't want to work on it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I'm done, Elena. I've been done for a long time. I'm just finally saying it out loud." "But why? What did I do?" "I can change, I can." That's exactly the problem. He cut me off, and now there was heat in his voice. Anger. "You're so desperate to please everyone else that you've never developed into your own person. You're boring, Elena. You have no interests, no career, no life outside of following me around like a puppy." Each word was a knife. I felt my eyes filling with tears, felt my throat closing. "I gave up my career for you," I whispered. "You asked me to. You said you needed support while you built your business, that having me home would make everything easier. And it did. For a while. But that was almost a decade ago, Elena. What have you done since then? What have you built? What do you even bring to this marriage besides being available?" The cruelty was breathtaking. This was the man I'd loved since I was 25. The man I'd rearranged my entire life to support. The man whose success I'd celebrated like it was my own because I'd been taught that a wife's role was to be her husband's foundation. "I bring loyalty," I said, my voice shaking. "I bring commitment. I bring love." "I don't want your love," David shouted, and I flinched. "I want a partner who challenges me, who has her own ambitions, who brings something to the table besides meal planning and grocery shopping. I want someone interesting, Elena. And you're not. You haven't been for years." I was crying openly now, unable to stop the tears even though I knew they would only make him angrier. They always did. "Please, David. We can fix this. I'll go back to work. I'll find hobbies. I don't want you to fix yourself for me. I just want you to leave." The silence that followed felt like drowning. I stared at my husband, this stranger wearing David's face, and tried to find the man I'd married. The one who used to laugh at my jokes, who used to say I was the best thing that ever happened to him, who used to look at me like I mattered. But that man was gone. Maybe he'd never existed. Maybe I'd just been so desperate to be loved that I'd imagined him into being. "I need you out by the end of the week," David continued, his voice businesslike now, like we were discussing a contract termination. "Take your personal items. I'll have the rest shipped once you have an address." "David, this is my home too. We bought it together. Actually, if you check the deed, it's in my name. I bought it with my income from my job. You contributed nothing financially." Another knife. Another reminder of how completely I'd made myself dependent on someone who'd been keeping score the entire time. Where am I supposed to go? He shrugged, actually shrugged, like my homelessness was a minor inconvenience. That's not my problem anymore, Elena. Maybe one of your friends will take you in. Though I can't imagine many will want to deal with your neediness. I don't have many friends, I said quietly, because I'd let them all drift away. Too busy being the perfect wife. Too consumed with David's needs to maintain my own relationships. Well, that's another thing you'll need to figure out. He picked up his briefcase, already moving toward his study. You have until Sunday. Pack your things. David, please. Elena. He turned back to me, and the coldness in his eyes was worse than the anger had been. Let me be very clear. No man is ever going to want you. You're 34 with no career, no money, no prospects. You're not particularly beautiful or interesting. You have nothing to offer. So do yourself a favor and don't embarrass yourself by begging. Just accept that this is over and move on with whatever pathetic excuse for a life you're going to build. And with that, my husband of 9 years walked into his study and closed the door. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the dinner I'd made that neither of us would eat, and felt something break inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I spent that night on the couch, unable to face the bedroom we'd shared. Sleep came in fragments between bouts of crying so hard I thought I might physically break apart. By morning, David was already gone. A note on the counter. Remember, Sunday. I called my sister first. Carmen lived 3 states away with her husband and 2 kids. We'd grown distant over the years, mostly because David had always found excuses why we couldn't visit, why holidays at her place didn't work for him. Elena. Carmen's voice was surprised. We hadn't spoken in months. Is everything okay? David wants a divorce. The words came out flat. I'd cried so much I was empty. He's kicking me out. I have until Sunday. Silence. Then, oh, Elena. I'm so sorry. But I can't say I'm surprised. That man has been treating you terribly for years. You never said anything. Would you have listened? Every time I tried to talk to you about how he treated you, you defended him, made excuses. You were so deep in it you couldn't see it. She was right. I knew she was right. Can I come stay with you? Just for a little while? Until I figure things out. Another pause. Longer this time. Elena, I would love to help. But Miguel just lost his job. We're barely making ends meet with our own family. I don't have space or resources to take someone else in right now. I'm sorry. It's okay, I said automatically. I understand. I called 3 other people that day. Former friends I'd neglected for years while being consumed with David's needs. One didn't answer. One was kind, but said she didn't have room. One was blunt. Elena, you ghosted us all for years. I don't think it's fair to suddenly need us now that your marriage fell apart. By Friday afternoon, I was packing my life into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. 9 years reduced to 3 pieces of luggage. Everything else, the furniture we'd bought together, the kitchen items I'd carefully selected, the decorations I'd chosen to make our house a home. All of it staying behind because technically I'd contributed nothing. I had $800 in my personal checking account. No job. No career to return to after 9 years away. No references because I hadn't worked since I was 25. Saturday night, I searched women's shelters near me and found the Haven Center, a temporary shelter for women in crisis. The photos showed a clean, simple building. The description promised dignity, safety, and support. Sunday morning, David came home specifically to watch me leave. You're really going to a shelter? He leaned against the doorframe, watching me load my suitcases into my 10-year-old sedan. That's pathetic, Elena. Even for you. I didn't respond. Just kept loading my things. You know what? I almost feel sorry for you. Almost. But then I remember how boring you made my life for 9 years, and I just feel relieved you're finally someone else's problem. I climbed into my car, hands shaking as I started the engine. David tapped on my window. I rolled it down, hating myself for still responding to his commands. Just so you know, he said, leaning down so I could see his face clearly. No man is ever going to want you. Not after me. You're damaged goods, Elena. Used up. Whatever pathetic life you build from here will never compare to what you had with me. Remember that. I drove away without answering, watching in my rearview mirror as David stood in the driveway of our home, already pulling out his phone, already moving on. The Haven Center was a low brick building on the edge of town, surrounded by a tall fence and a garden that showed signs of careful tending. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The woman at the front desk was maybe 60, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her name tag read Dorothy. "Can I help you?" "I need a place to stay," I managed. "Just temporarily, until I can figure things out." Dorothy didn't ask questions, didn't make me prove my worthiness, just handed me a clipboard with intake forms and said, "Welcome. You're safe here." I burst into tears right there in the lobby. My room was small, barely large enough for a twin bed, a small dresser, and a chair. But it was clean. Safe. Mine. I unpacked my 3 bags and sat on the bed, staring at the beige walls, and thought, this is my life now. 34 years old, living in a women's shelter, with no prospects and no future. David's words echoed in my head. No man is ever going to want you. And the worst part was, I believed him. The Haven Center had rules, chores, structure, community meetings. At first, it felt infantilizing, being told when to do laundry, when meals were served, what cleaning duties were assigned. But slowly, I began to see it differently. Structure was a gift when you had no idea how to structure your own life. Community was salvation when you'd been isolated for years. Dorothy ran a daily morning session called Building Your Foundation. All residents were encouraged to attend. I went mostly because I had nowhere else to be and nothing else to do. Today we're going to talk about skills inventory, Dorothy said that first Monday morning. About 15 women sat in a circle in the common room, ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s. I want each of you to write down everything you know how to do. And I mean everything. Can you cook? That's a skill. Can you organize? That's a skill. Can you listen? That's a skill. Nothing is too small. I stared at my blank paper for a long time. What could I do? I'd been a graphic designer once, but that was a lifetime ago. Software had changed. Skills had evolved. I'd let it all atrophy while I focused on being David's wife. Slowly, I began writing, cooking, meal planning, budget management, organization, event coordination, graphic design, outdated, communication, problem solving. Elena, would you share? Dorothy asked. I read my list quietly, feeling inadequate even saying these things aloud. Do you hear what I hear? Dorothy asked the group. Elena has project management skills, organizational skills, creative skills, budget management. Do you know how valuable those are? How many businesses need exactly those capabilities? I'd never thought of it that way. I'd always seen my homemaking as lesser than real work. David had certainly framed it that way. This week, Dorothy continued, I want everyone to volunteer for at least one community event the Haven sponsors. Get out of your own head. Contribute. Remember what it feels like to be useful. That Thursday, I volunteered at a community dinner the Haven hosted for low-income families. We served food, helped with kids, cleaned up afterward. Simple work, but it felt good. Purposeful. You're a natural with people, Dorothy observed as I helped a young mother wrangle 3 kids through the buffet line. You have a gentle strength that puts people at ease. That's rare, Elena. That's valuable. Gentle strength. No one had ever described me that way before. David had called me weak, boring, lacking backbone. But maybe I'd just been strong in ways he couldn't recognize. The Haven held community events every week. Dinners, clothing drives, job skills workshops. I started volunteering for all of them. Partly because it felt good to be useful. Partly because being busy kept me from spiraling into the depression that lurked at the edges of my consciousness. It was at one of these events, a fundraising dinner for the shelter, that I first saw him. Richard Morrison walked into the Haven's modest dining hall like he belonged there, despite the expensive suit and obvious wealth. He was maybe 45, tall, with graying temples and the kind of presence that made people notice without him trying. Who's that? I whispered to Dorothy as we set up tables. That's Richard Morrison, CEO of Morrison Holdings. They're one of our biggest sponsors. He comes to every event personally, not just his check. That tells you something about a man. I watched Richard move through the room, shaking hands with staff and residents alike. He didn't just do the polite small talk rich people usually do. He actually listened, asked questions, remembered names from previous events. Elena, could you help serve? Dorothy asked, pulling me from my observation. I took my position behind the buffet line, ladling soup and smiling at guests. This was safe. This was something I knew how to do. The dinner was sponsored by Morrison Holdings, and Richard gave a brief speech before the meal, talking about community support, about dignity, about how everyone deserves safety and a chance to rebuild. The women at Haven aren't charity cases, he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. They're survivors, warriors, women who've faced impossible situations and are doing the hard work of rebuilding their lives. They don't need pity. They need support and respect and opportunity. I felt tears prick my eyes. When was the last time someone had spoken about women like me with anything other than condescension or judgment? After his speech, Richard went through the buffet line. When he reached my station, he met my eyes and smiled. "Thank you for volunteering tonight. It's the least I can do," I said automatically. The Haven has been, it saved my life. Something shifted in his expression. Interest, maybe, or recognition. "You're a resident?" I nodded, feeling that familiar shame creeping in. "Then you're exactly the kind of person I wanted to honor tonight," Richard said. "The ones doing the hard work of rebuilding. That takes courage most people can't imagine." He said it like he meant it, like he actually saw me as someone worthy of respect. "Thank you." I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He moved on, but I felt the impact of that brief exchange for hours afterward. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Dorothy pulled me aside. "Richard Morrison wants to talk to you." "What? What?" "I don't know, but when a man like that asks to speak to someone, you show up." I found Richard in the Haven's small courtyard, looking at the garden some residents tended. "Elena, right?" he said when he saw me. "Dorothy told me your name." "Yes. Is something wrong?" "Not at all. I just wanted to tell you that what you said earlier, about Haven saving your life, that's the kind of story I need to hear. The one that reminds me why this work matters." He gestured to a bench. "Do you have a minute to talk?" We sat, and somehow, I found myself telling him. Not everything, but enough. The divorce. The cruelty. The realization that I'd made myself so small in my marriage that I'd disappeared. Richard listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he didn't offer empty platitudes or advice. "My wife and I are separated," he said quietly. 20 years of marriage that looked perfect from the outside, but was empty at the core. "I understand something about losing yourself in someone else's expectations. But you're successful," I said. "You built a whole company. Success in business doesn't mean success in life, Elena. I have money and power and influence, but I couldn't tell you the last time I felt genuinely connected to another person. Couldn't tell you the last time someone looked at me and saw Richard instead of Morrison holding CEO. We talked for an hour. About marriage and loss and rebuilding. About the difference between who we present to the world and who we actually are. "I'm hosting a small dinner next week," Richard said as we stood to leave. "For major donors and volunteers. I'd like you to come. As my guest. I'm just a volunteer. And a shelter resident. I don't belong at that kind of event. Elena, you belong anywhere you choose to stand. Please come. Let me show you how much you have to offer." I almost said no. Almost let David's voice in my head tell me I wasn't good enough, didn't belong, would embarrass myself. But something in Richard's eyes made me say yes instead. The week before Richard's dinner was a blur of anxiety and something else I barely recognized. Anticipation. Dorothy helped me find something appropriate to wear, a simple navy dress donated to the Haven's clothing program. It fit perfectly, elegant without trying too hard. "You look beautiful," Dorothy said when I emerged from my room the night of the dinner. "More importantly, you look like yourself. Not like you're trying to be someone else." Richard sent a car for me, which felt absurdly fancy. The dinner was at a restaurant I'd never have entered on my own, the kind with cloth napkins and a wine list thicker than most books. I almost turned around 3 times before walking through the door. Richard was waiting in the lobby. His face lit up when he saw me, and I realized no one had looked at me that way in years. Not with desire necessarily, but with genuine pleasure at my presence. "Elena, I'm so glad you came. I was worried you'd change your mind." "I almost did," I admitted. "About 17 times. He laughed, a warm sound that made something in my chest unclench. "Honesty. I appreciate that." The dinner was small, maybe 20 people, but they were all obviously important. CEOs, philanthropists, community leaders. I felt completely out of my depth. But Richard never left my side. He introduced me not as a charity case or a volunteer, but as Elena Martinez, one of the most dedicated advocates for women's empowerment I know. I wanted to correct him, to say I wasn't an advocate, I was just a woman trying to survive. But Richard had a way of speaking about you that made you want to rise to his description rather than correct it. Elena was telling me about her background in graphic design, he said to one guest, a woman who ran a marketing firm. I think there's tremendous value in bringing people back into creative fields after extended absences. The perspective and maturity they gain in the interim often makes them better, not worse. I hadn't told Richard much about my design background, but he'd clearly listened to every word I'd said and filled in the implications. The marketing executive looked at me with new interest. Are you looking to get back into design work? I haven't worked in the field in 9 years, I admitted. I'm not sure I'm qualified anymore. Qualified is relative, she said. Passionate is what matters. Here's my card. Email me your portfolio if you have one, or even just some samples of what you used to do. I'm always looking for talent with authentic life experience. I took the card with shaking hands. This happened 3 more times during dinner. Richard would casually mention something I'd said, frame it as valuable, and suddenly people were looking at me like I might actually have something to offer. After dinner, Richard and I stood on the restaurant's patio, looking out at the city lights. Why are you doing this? I asked. Being so kind to me? You barely know me. I know enough, Richard said. I know you're rebuilding your life with grace and dignity. I know you volunteer your time despite having every reason to be bitter and withdrawn. I know you listen when people talk and actually hear what they're saying. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I'm not special, Richard. I'm a woman who failed at her marriage and ended up in a shelter. Elena, look at me. He waited until I met his eyes. You didn't fail at your marriage. Your marriage failed you. There's a difference. A massive difference. My husband said no man would ever want me. That I'm boring and worthless and used up. Richard's expression hardened. Your husband is an idiot. And I say that as someone who employs thousands of people and has gotten quite good at identifying idiots. I laughed despite myself, a small sound that felt rusty from disuse. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Richard continued. I see a woman who survived something devastating and is doing the hard work of rebuilding instead of giving up. I see someone who gives her time to help others despite having so little herself. I see intelligence and kindness and quiet strength. If your husband couldn't see those things, that's his failure of vision, not your failure of worth. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. I don't know how to believe that. Then let me believe it for you until you can believe it for yourself. Richard drove me back to the Haven himself, insisting the car service wasn't necessary. We sat in the parking lot talking for another hour, about everything and nothing. I'm separated from my wife, Richard said again. The divorce will be final in a few months. It's been a long time coming. We built parallel lives instead of a shared one. Do you regret it? The marriage. I regret the time I wasted trying to force something that wasn't working. But I don't regret the lessons. They've made me value authenticity over performance, connection over convenience. He walked me to the door, and before I went inside, he said, Elena, I'd like to see you again. Not as a donor and volunteer, as 2 people who enjoy talking to each other. Would that be okay? Every warning bell in my head screamed that this was too fast, too risky, that I should focus on myself and not get involved with anyone. But another part of me, the part that had been silent for 9 years, whispered, say yes. Choose yourself. Choose possibility. I'd like that, I said. Over the next month, my life developed a rhythm I hadn't known was possible. Days at the Haven, helping with operations, and increasingly taking on administrative tasks Dorothy insisted I was good at. Evenings sometimes with Richard, dinners, walks, conversations that lasted hours. He never pushed, never assumed, always asked, always listened. I'm not looking for a relationship, I told him one evening as we walked through a park near downtown. I'm not ready for that. I'm not asking for a relationship, Richard replied. I'm asking for your company, your friendship, the rest. If there's ever a rest, that's something we figure out together if and when we're both ready. It was such a relief, that honesty, that lack of pressure. Meanwhile, I've been working on rebuilding my design portfolio. The marketing executive from the dinner had actually meant it when she said to email her. She'd looked at my old work and offered me a freelance project, just a small logo redesign, but it paid $500 and came with actual professional feedback. This is good, she wrote in her email. Raw in places, but good. You have an eye for clean design and emotional resonance. Keep sending me samples as you create them. I spent hours at the Haven's computer lab, teaching myself updated design software through YouTube tutorials. It was humbling, being a beginner again. but also exhilarating. I was building something that was mine. Dorothy noticed the change in me. You're standing taller, she observed one morning, taking up more space. It's good to see. I was starting to believe, just a little, that maybe David had been wrong. Maybe I wasn't worthless. Maybe I had something to offer. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon in early spring, everything shifted. I was at the Haven's front desk, covering for Dorothy during her lunch break, when a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. A silver Lexus I'd helped David pick out 3 years ago. My stomach dropped. David walked through the front door looking exactly like himself. Expensive suit, confident stride, that particular expression he wore when he was about to convince someone of something. "Elena," he said, stopping short when he saw me behind the desk. "I didn't think you'd actually still be here." "What do you want, David?" "To talk. Can we go somewhere private?" "No. Anything you need to say, you can say here." He looked around at the modest lobby, clearly uncomfortable being seen in a women's shelter. "Fine. I came to tell you I got promoted. VP of Development at Morrison Holdings. Big raise, corner office, the works." Morrison Holdings. Richard's company. The connection clicked into place with nauseating clarity. "You're working for Morrison Holdings?" "Have been for 6 months. Just got the promotion last week." He smiled, that same self-satisfied expression I'd seen 1,000 times. "I wanted you to know that I'm doing great. That leaving you was the right decision. No offense. Why would you come here just to tell me that?" "Because I wanted you to see what you missed out on. Wanted you to understand that while you're living in a shelter, I'm thriving. It's nothing personal, Elena. I just think you should know that I was right. About everything." I stared at my ex-husband, this man who'd spent 9 years slowly convincing me I was worthless, and felt nothing. No anger. No hurt. Just a kind of distant pity. "Is that all?" David looked thrown by my lack of reaction. "I also wanted to tell you that I'm seeing someone. Stephanie from accounting. She's 28, ambitious, actually has career goals. Everything you weren't. I'm happy for you, David. You are happy for me? If she makes you happy, then yes. I hope it works out." He seemed genuinely confused by my response. He'd come here to wound me, to prove his superiority, and I wasn't playing the role he'd expected. "Well, good. That's good." He shifted uncomfortably. "So you're really okay? Living here? I'm rebuilding my life. Learning who I am outside of being your wife. It's actually been good for me. Come on, Elena. You don't have to pretend with me. I know you must be struggling. If you need help, I don't need anything from you, David. Not help. Not validation. Not closure. I'm fine. You're living in a shelter. Temporarily. I'm working on my design portfolio again. Building a client base. Figuring out my next steps. I'm actually doing really well." David laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Design portfolio? Elena, who's going to hire you? You're 34 with a 9-year gap in your resume. You're delusional if you think. I think you should leave now." Dorothy's voice cut through David's monologue. She'd returned from lunch and was standing in the doorway with an expression that could freeze lava. "You're not welcome here. I'm just talking to my wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected. "And Dorothy's right. You should go." David looked between us, clearly frustrated that his grand gesture of superiority had fallen flat. "You know what? Fine. Keep telling yourself you're doing great while you live in charity housing. I'll be in my corner office at Morrison Holdings, making 6 figures and actually contributing to society." He left, and I sat down heavily in the desk chair, my hands shaking despite my outward calm. "You handled that beautifully," Dorothy said. Didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "I feel sick." "That's normal." "But Elena, did you hear yourself? You stood up to him. Didn't apologize. Didn't shrink. That's growth. He works for Richard's company. He just got promoted to VP." Dorothy's eyes widened. "Oh, that complicates things." That evening, I called Richard. We'd been talking daily, but I'd never called him before, always waited for him to reach out first, not wanting to presume. "Elena, is everything okay? My ex-husband came to the Haven today. He works for you. David Torres. Just got promoted to VP of Development." Silence. "Then, David Torres is your ex-husband? You know him?" "I signed off on his promotion last week." "Elena, I had no idea. You never mentioned his last name or where he worked." "I try not to think about him at all." I took a breath. "Richard, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is this, us talking, the dinner, the job connections, is this because you feel sorry for me? Because I'm some charity case whose ex-husband works for you. Elena, I didn't even know who your ex was until 30 seconds ago. But now that you do, does it change things? Another pause. It changes that I now know I employ someone with catastrophically bad judgment. Anyone who could treat you the way you've described being treated is either an idiot or cruel. Probably both. Despite everything, I laughed. You can't call your VP an idiot. I can call him whatever I want. I own the company. But Elena, to answer your actual question, this doesn't change anything about how I see you. You're not a charity case. You're someone I enjoy spending time with. Someone who makes me think differently about things. Someone who's honest and kind and doing the hard work of rebuilding her life. I just needed to hear you say it. I'll say it as many times as you need to hear it. We talked for another hour, and by the time we hung up, I felt steadier. But I also felt a growing certainty that David and Richard's professional relationship was going to intersect with my personal life in ways I couldn't predict. I was right. Richard's company held quarterly events for executives and their partners. Formal affairs meant to build team cohesion and celebrate achievements. Richard had mentioned them in passing, always careful not to make me feel pressured to attend anything I wasn't comfortable with. The spring gala is next week, he said during one of our walks. It's a black tie thing at the Grandview Hotel. Honestly, these events are usually boring corporate nonsense, but I'm required to show face. Would you consider coming with me? As my guest? Richard, I don't know. That's a professional event with your employees. Won't it be awkward if people know about us? And David will be there. Elena, I'm separated and nearly divorced. You're divorced. Two adults attending an event together is not scandalous. And as for David, he's one of 300 employees. The chances you'd even interact with him are minimal. I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a black tie gala. That's not a no, though, is it? Richard smiled. What if I told you I've already arranged for a stylist to meet with you this week? Not because I'm trying to change you, but because I know you feel more comfortable when you're dressed appropriately for an event. Would that help? The old Elena would have said no, would have insisted she couldn't possibly, would have made herself small and invisible to avoid any risk of embarrassment. The new Elena, the one who was rebuilding, reclaiming, remembering her worth, said yes. The stylist Richard sent was a woman named Claudia who met me at a boutique downtown with racks of gowns already pulled. Richard said you're elegant, understated, and prefer classic over trendy, Claudia said. So I pulled pieces that reflect that. But Elena, you get final say on everything. This is about you feeling confident, not about pleasing anyone else. We tried on 15 dresses. Some were too much, too flashy. Others too plain, too forgettable. But when I put on a deep emerald green gown, simple lines, elegant draping, just enough detail to be interesting without being overwhelming, both Claudia and I knew it was right. You look powerful, Claudia said, like someone who belongs anywhere she chooses to be. The night of the gala, Richard picked me up at the Haven himself. When I emerged from the building in the emerald gown, my hair styled in soft waves, wearing borrowed diamond earrings from Dorothy's personal collection, Richard stopped walking. Elena, you're stunning. It's just a dress. It's not the dress. It's you. You're radiant. The Grandview Hotel ballroom was exactly as impressive as I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, live orchestra, hundreds of people in expensive formal wear. Richard kept his hand on the small of my back as we entered, a gesture of support and partnership that made me feel grounded. Morrison, glad you could make it. A man in his 50s approached with a woman on his arm who was wearing enough diamonds to fund a small country. And who's this lovely creature? This is Elena Martinez, Richard said. Elena, this is James Whitmore, head of our acquisitions division, and his wife Patricia. We made small talk, and I found myself relaxing into the rhythm of it. These were just people, after all. Wealthy, powerful people, but people nonetheless. And Richard's clear pleasure in my company gave me confidence I hadn't known I possessed. We'd been there maybe an hour, Richard introducing me to various executives and colleagues, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Boss, great event as always. I turned to see David, looking polished and confident, with a young woman on his arm, who must have been Stephanie. He was mid-handshake with Richard when he saw me. The color drained from David's face. David, Richard said pleasantly, not releasing the handshake. I don't believe you've met my guest. This is Elena Martinez. David's mouth opened and closed. He looked between me and Richard, clearly trying to process what he was seeing. We've met, David finally managed. Elena is my ex-wife, I finished calmly. Hello, David. Stephanie, it's nice to meet you. Stephanie, to her credit, looked more uncomfortable than smug. Hi. David didn't mention that his ex would be here. I didn't know, David said, his voice tight. Elena, what are you doing here? I'm Richard's guest, I said simply. David turned to Richard. Sir, I had no idea you knew my ex-wife. Interesting, Richard said, his voice carefully neutral. Because Elena and I have been spending quite a bit of time together over the past few months. She's been instrumental in volunteer coordination for our corporate partnership with the Haven Center. The homeless shelter? David's voice was too loud, too sharp. Several people nearby turned to look. The Women's Resource Center, Richard corrected, his tone taking on an edge. Though I'm curious why you'd say it that way, David. Is there something shameful about supporting women in crisis? No. David was floundering now. I'm just surprised that Elena is involved in that kind of work. She's not really the charitable type. That's odd, Richard said. Because every staff member at Haven speaks incredibly highly of her contributions. Dorothy Chun, the director, says Elena has been one of their most dedicated volunteers and has significantly improved their administrative systems. David's face had gone from pale to red. Well, I'm sure she's trying to stay busy. Given her circumstances. Her circumstances? Living in the shelter. Since the divorce. The nearby conversations quieted. People were definitely listening now. Richard's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Became more formal, more distant. David, I'm going to say this once, quietly, and I hope you hear me. The way you speak about your ex-wife is disrespectful and inappropriate. Elena's living situation is none of your business and certainly not something to be discussed at a professional event. I didn't mean. I'm sorry, You should also know, Richard continued, that I've gotten to know Elena quite well over the past few months. She's intelligent, creative, hardworking, and has more integrity than most people I meet. So whatever narrative you've constructed about why your marriage ended, I can assure you I'm not interested in your version of events. David looked like he'd been slapped. Stephanie was pulling on his arm, clearly wanting to escape. Elena, Richard said, turning to me with warmth returning to his eyes. Shall we get some champagne? I believe they're about to announce the Innovation Awards. He offered his arm, and I took it, walking away from David without looking back. But I could feel his eyes on us for the rest of the evening. The fallout from the gala was immediate and uncomfortable. David called me the next day, the first time we'd spoken directly since he'd shown up at the Haven weeks ago. Elena, we need to talk. I don't think we do, David. You're dating my boss? My boss. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? I'm not dating anyone. Richard and I are friends. Friends don't look at each other the way you two were looking at each other. Friends don't. He stopped himself. This is humiliating, Elena. Everyone at work is going to know that my ex-wife is sleeping with the CEO. I'm not sleeping with anyone. And even if I were, that would be none of your business. We're divorced, David. You don't get an opinion on my personal life. He's going to use you, David said, his voice changing from anger to something that almost sounded like concern. Men like Richard Morrison don't end up with women like you. He's just amusing himself with the charity case. When he gets bored, he'll move on, and you'll be even more pathetic than you already are. I should have hung up, should have ended the conversation and blocked his number. But something in me snapped. You want to know what's pathetic, David? Spending 9 years of your life systematically destroying someone's confidence so you can feel superior. Throwing your wife out with nowhere to go, and then showing up months later to gloat about your promotion. Seeing her happy and immediately trying to undermine it because you can't stand the idea that she might be fine without you. I'm trying to protect you. No, you're trying to control me. Even now, even after the divorce. You're trying to make me feel small because seeing me stand tall threatens whatever story you've told yourself about why our marriage ended. You were boring, Elena. You were weak and clingy and had nothing interesting to offer. I did you a favor by leaving you. If that's what you need to believe, go ahead. But David, I'm not the same woman you threw away. I'm rebuilding my life on my own terms. And whether Richard and I are friends or something more is none of your concern. I don't need your protection or your opinion or your permission to live my life. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. But underneath the adrenaline was something else. Pride. I'd stood up to him. Hadn't backed down. hadn't apologized for existing. 3 days later, flowers arrived at the Haven. 2 dozen roses with a card that read, "I'm sorry. Can we please talk? David." I threw them in the trash. The next day, he showed up at the Haven during evening meal service. I was helping serve food when I saw him walk in, looking out of place in his work suit among the residents and volunteers. Dorothy intercepted him before he could reach me. "Mr. Torres, this is a private facility. Unless you're here to volunteer or make a donation, I need you to leave. I just want 5 minutes with Elena." "Elena doesn't want 5 minutes with you. She's made that clear. I'm her husband." "Ex-husband," Dorothy corrected sharply. "And you're the man who kicked her out with nowhere to go. You have a lot of nerve showing up here." David's face reddened. "I made a mistake. I realize that now. I want to talk to her about reconciliation." At that, I set down my ladle and walked over. "What did you just say?" "I made a mistake, Elena. These past few months without you, I've realized what I lost. I want to try again. Give our marriage another chance." I stared at him, genuinely confused. "Why?" "Because I miss you. Because I was wrong about you. Because you saw me with Richard," I finished. "Because suddenly I have value in your eyes, because someone you respect values me." That's exactly it, David. You didn't miss me when I was living here in obscurity. You didn't regret leaving me when you thought I was struggling alone. You only want me back now because Richard Morrison thinks I'm worth something. Because my value was validated by someone whose opinion you care about. That's not fair. What's not fair is spending 9 years making someone feel worthless and then getting upset when they believe you. I took a breath, steadying myself. "David, I don't love you anymore. I'm not sure I ever did, really. I think I loved who I hoped you could be. But that person doesn't exist. Elena, please." "No. Listen to me. You're not a bad person. You're just not the right person for me. You need someone who makes you feel successful by comparison. Someone who admires you uncritically. Someone who doesn't challenge you to be better because you don't want to be better, you just want to be right. That's not true. And I need someone who sees my strength without me having to prove it. Someone who values quiet competence as much as loud achievement. Someone who wants a partner instead of an audience." David's expression shifted through several emotions. Anger, hurt, disbelief. "So that's it. You're choosing him." "I'm choosing me, David. For the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing myself. If Richard ends up being part of that, great. If not, that's fine too. Because I've learned that I can be whole on my own. You taught me that, actually. By leaving me, you forced me to discover that I could survive without you. More than survive, I could thrive. I don't believe this. You're going to regret this, Elena. Maybe. But I'd rather regret taking a risk than regret staying small to make someone else comfortable." David looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact second he realized I meant it. That I was actually, truly done. "Fine," he said finally. "I hope you're happy with your CEO boyfriend. I hope he doesn't get bored with his charity project. Even now, you can't help yourself," I said sadly. "You have to diminish me to feel okay about losing me. That tells me everything I need to know about whether reconciliation was ever really possible." David left without another word. I stood there in the Haven's dining hall, surrounded by women who'd survived their own impossible situations, and felt something settle in my chest. Closure, maybe. Or just clarity. Dorothy put her arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" "I'm perfect," I said. And I meant it. That evening, Richard called. "Dorothy told me David came to the Haven. Are you all right?" "I am, actually. We talked. Really talked. And I told him it was over. Really over." "How do you feel?" "Free." I laughed softly. "Is that strange? I thought I'd feel sad or angry or something. But I just feel free." "That's not strange at all. That's clarity." We were quiet for a moment. Then Richard said, "Elena, I need to tell you something. And I need you to really hear me." "Okay." My divorce was finalized yesterday. I'm legally single for the first time in 20 years. And I've spent those 20 years in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, but was hollow at the core. My wife and I were partners in business and social climbing, but we were never really partners in life. "Richard, let me finish. Meeting you has reminded me what actual connection feels like. What it means to talk to someone and feel seen, not just observed. What it's like to be with someone who challenges me to be better instead of just more successful." My heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I have feelings for you, Elena. Real feelings. And I understand if you're not ready. I understand if you need time. I understand if the David situation and the work connection make this too complicated. But I needed you to know that this isn't casual for me. You're not a charity project or a midlife crisis or something I'm doing to feel good about myself. You're someone I genuinely care about. Someone I could see building a real life with. I sat down on my small bed in my small room, feeling the weight of his words. I'm scared, I admitted. I'm scared of getting hurt again. Of making myself vulnerable to someone who might decide I'm not enough. Of losing myself in someone else's expectations. I'm scared too, Richard said. Of messing this up. Of being another person who disappoints you. Of not being what you need. So what do? We're honest. We go slow. We choose each other every day instead of assuming we're chosen. And if it stops working, we're brave enough to say so before we damage each other. That sounds terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. That's how you know it's real. I took a breath. Okay. Yes. Let's try. Really try. Not just friendship. Not just spending time together. Let's actually see if this could be something. I could hear Richard smile through the phone. Yeah. I'm coming over. Richard, it's 10 o'clock at night, and I live in a women's shelter. You can't just. I'm coming to the parking lot. Put on shoes and come outside. I need to see you. I laughed and did as he asked, grabbing a cardigan and heading out to the Havens parking lot where Richard's car was already pulling in. He got out and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. I'm all in, Elena. Whatever this becomes, I'm all in. Me too. I whispered against his shoulder. I'm terrified, but I'm all in. We stood there in the parking lot of a women's shelter, two people who'd both survived marriages that had nearly destroyed them, choosing to risk again anyway. Choosing hope over fear. Choosing forward. 6 months later, I stood in the small office space I'd rented for my design business, Martinez Creative Solutions. It was modest, but mine, paid for with income from actual client work I'd built through networking, skill development, and sheer determination. The walls were still bare except for a single frame, the first check I'd ever received for freelance work. Not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Proof that I could build something from nothing. That David had been wrong about my worth. I heard the door open and turned to see Richard carrying 2 coffee cups and a bag that smelled like fresh pastries. Breakfast delivery for the hard-working entrepreneur. You know you don't have to keep bringing me food. I can feed myself. I know you can. I want to anyway. There's a difference. We'd been officially together for 4 months now, and it was different than anything I'd experienced before. Richard never made me feel small or silly or less than. When we disagreed, and we did, sometimes significantly, he listened instead of dismissing. When I succeeded, he celebrated without needing to make it about himself. When I struggled, he supported without trying to fix. I got the museum account, I said, pulling up the email. They want me to redesign their entire marketing materials package. Elena, that's huge. That's the biggest contract you've landed. I know. I'm terrified I'll mess it up. You won't. But even if you did, which you won't, you'd learn from it and do better next time. That's how growth works. I kissed him, grateful for the steady support that never felt like pressure. How are things at Morrison Holdings? Richard made a face. David submitted his resignation this morning. I set down my coffee. What? He got an offer from a competitor. More money, bigger title. But Elena, I think it's also because working for me while I'm with you is too uncomfortable for his ego. Did you do anything to make him uncomfortable? No. I've been scrupulously professional. But I also haven't hidden the fact that we're together. Maybe that was enough. I thought about David, about the man who'd told me no one would ever want me, who'd kicked me out with nothing, who'd tried to come back only when someone he respected valued me. I hope he finds what he needs, I said. And I meant it. Not because I forgave all the hurt, but because holding on to anger about David meant giving him space in my life he didn't deserve. You're extraordinary, Richard said. Do you know that? I'm really not. I'm just figuring things out as I go. That's what makes you extraordinary. You don't pretend to have all the answers. You just keep showing up and doing the work. That evening, I returned to the Haven for weekly dinner service. Even though I'd moved into my own apartment 2 months ago, I still volunteered regularly. This place had saved me when I needed saving. The least I could do was pay it forward. Dorothy pulled me aside after the meal. Elena, I wanted to talk to you about something. We're expanding our job readiness program, and I need someone to run it. Someone who understands the journey from crisis to stability. Someone who has the organizational skills, the empathy, and the credibility with our residents. Dorothy, I'm not qualified to. Stop. You are absolutely qualified. And it's paid. Not a fortune, but enough to supplement your design income while you build the business. 20 hours a week. You develop curriculum, work one-on-one with residents, coordinate with employer partners. I felt tears prickling my eyes. You want me to work here? I want you to lead here. There's a difference. I thought about the woman I'd been 8 months ago, broken, scared, convinced I had nothing to offer. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, building a business, in a healthy relationship, confident in my worth. Yes, I said. I'd love to. That night, I called Carmen. We'd been rebuilding our relationship slowly. Monthly video calls, tentative conversations about our childhood, and our marriages, and our paths forward. I have news, I told her. Good news. Really good news. I got a job offer. Not just client work, an actual position running a program at the Haven. Elena, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Thanks. And Carmen, I'm sorry for letting David come between us, for making excuses for how he treated me, for disappearing for so many years. I'm sorry too, for not fighting harder to stay connected, for judging your choices instead of supporting you through them. We talked for 2 hours, and it felt like finding a piece of myself I'd lost. 3 months later, Richard and I were having dinner at my apartment. I'd cooked, he'd brought wine. When he set down his fork and looked at me with unusual seriousness. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen before you respond. My stomach tightened. Okay. I love you, Elena. I'm in love with you. And I know it's only been 7 months, and I know we both have complicated histories, and I know this might be too fast, but I need you to know that this is real for me. You're real for me. And whatever we build together, I'm committed to building it with honesty and respect and actual partnership. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. I love you too, and I'm scared and hopeful and grateful all at once. We don't have to rush anything, Richard said quickly. I'm not asking for marriage or moving in or anything like that. I just needed you to know how I feel. What if I mess this up? What if I fall back into old patterns? Then we talk about it. We work on it. We choose each other again. Elena, love isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to grow together. How did you get so wise about relationships after spending 20 years in a bad marriage? I learned from my mistakes. And I learned from you. From watching you rebuild your life with such grace and courage. You've taught me more about resilience and authenticity than anyone I've ever known. 6 months after that conversation, I stood in front of 20 women at the Haven, teaching my first official job readiness workshop. I looked out at faces that reminded me of my own from a year ago, scared, uncertain, hoping for something better, but not quite believing it was possible. A year ago, I told them, I was sitting where you're sitting. My husband had kicked me out, told me I was worthless, convinced me no one would ever want me. And I believed him. For a while, I really believed him. They were listening, leaning forward. But here's what I've learned. The people who diminish you are always wrong. Always. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to appreciate it. You are inherently valuable, inherently worthy, inherently enough. Exactly as you are. I saw tears on several faces. Saw recognition. Saw hope beginning to kindle. The journey from here to stability isn't easy. It's not a straight line. There are setbacks and disappointments and days when you'll want to give up. But I'm here to tell you that it's possible. That you can rebuild. That you can become someone you're proud of. Not despite what you've been through, but because of it. Because surviving hard things makes you strong. And strength, combined with support and determination, can create miracles. After the workshop, a young woman named Jasmine approached me. Ms. Martinez, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you still think about your ex-husband? Do you still miss what you had? I thought about David, about the man who'd thrown me away like trash, who'd shown up months later trying to claim me back once someone else had valued me, who'd resigned from his job rather than work for a man who loved me. I don't miss what I had, I said honestly, because what I had wasn't real. It was me making myself small to fit someone else's idea of what I should be. What I have now, my work, my relationships, my sense of self, that's real. And real is so much better than comfortable lies. Jasmine nodded slowly. I hope I can get there. Where you are. You will. One day, one choice, one step at a time. And Jasmine, you don't have to get there alone. That's what this place is. That's what community is. We hold each other up until we're strong enough to stand on our own. That evening, Richard picked me up from the Haven. As we drove through the city, I looked out at the lights and thought about the journey from that awful day when David had kicked me out to this moment right now. Driving through the city with a man who loved me, doing work that mattered, becoming someone I was proud of. What are you thinking about? Richard asked. About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best thing. If David hadn't left me, I never would have ended up at Haven. Never would have remembered my design skills. Never would have met you. Never would have discovered who I could be when I stopped trying to be what someone else needed. Do you think you'd go back and change it if you could? The marriage, the pain, all of it. I considered the question seriously. No, because it led me here. To this life. To this version of myself. And she's pretty amazing, even on the days when she doesn't feel like it. Richard reached across and took my hand. She's extraordinary. Every single day. We drove in comfortable silence, and I thought about the hook that had started this story. He told me no man would ever want me as he threw my suitcase onto the driveway. David had been so catastrophically wrong. Not because Richard wanted me, though that was nice, but because I'd learned that being wanted wasn't the point. Being whole was the point. Being true to yourself was the point. Building a life you're proud of was the point. Whether someone wanted me or not didn't determine my worth. I determined my worth. And I was priceless. 2 years later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Martinez Creative Solutions' new downtown office. What had started as a modest one-room space had grown into a small suite with 3 employees and a client roster that included museums, nonprofits, and several major corporations. Elena stood in front of the wall where she displayed their completed projects, sipping her coffee and feeling that quiet satisfaction that comes from building something real. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Lunch today? I have news I want to share in person. She smiled and replied, my office or yours? Yours. I like your space better. Less corporate, more creative. 12:30. Perfect. See you then. Their relationship had continued to deepen over the past 18 months. They'd moved in together 6 months ago, a beautiful loft apartment that felt like both of them, filled with Richard's books and Elena's artwork, a space they'd created together rather than one person imposing their taste on the other. They'd had hard conversations, disagreements about money and time and boundaries, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, Elena trying to make herself small, Richard trying to fix instead of listen. But they'd worked through each challenge with honesty and therapy and genuine commitment to growing together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real was so much better than the illusion of perfection Elena had chased in her marriage to David. At 12:30 exactly, Richard arrived carrying bags from Elena's favorite Thai place. He kissed her hello, and she could see excitement in his eyes. Okay, what's the news? You look like you're about to burst. I've decided to start a foundation, Richard said, focused on supporting women's economic empowerment, job training, small business grants, housing assistance. And I want you to be on the founding board. Not because you're my partner, but because you have the expertise and the perspective we need. Elena felt her eyes filling with tears. Richard, that's incredible. I'm calling it the Morrison Martinez Initiative. If you're okay with that, your name deserves to be on this, Elena. Your journey, your insights, your commitment to this work. It's the foundation of what we're building. You don't have to put my name on it. I want to. You've taught me what it looks like to rebuild from nothing. What it means to support people with dignity instead of pity. What authentic empowerment looks like versus performative charity. This foundation is as much yours as mine. They spent lunch talking about the vision, the programs they'd offer, the partnerships they'd build, the lives they could change. It felt like everything Elena had been through was suddenly taking on new meaning, new purpose. After Richard left to return to work, Elena sat in her office thinking about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. Broken, scared, convinced she had nothing to offer. And she thought about the woman she'd become, running a successful business, doing meaningful work at Haven, planning a foundation that would help women like her former self. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello. Elena? It's David. She'd blocked his number months ago, but he must have been calling from a different phone. What do you want, David? I heard about your business. And about the foundation you're starting with Morrison. I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. Elena laughed, a sound without humor. You're proud of me? David, do you hear yourself? I know I treated you terribly. I know I was wrong about everything. And I know my apology doesn't mean anything to you. But I needed to say it anyway. You were right that day at the Haven. I only wanted you back when someone I respected wanted you. That was selfish and cruel. Yes, it was. Stephanie and I broke up. She left me for her coworker. Said I was too insecure and controlling. That I needed to make her small to feel big. Elena felt a flash of sympathy for Stephanie, but none for David. I'm sorry you're hurting. But David, this isn't my problem to solve anymore. I know. I'm not asking you to solve it. I'm calling to say that I finally understand what I lost. And I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Elena thought about all the times she'd imagined this moment. All the speeches she'd prepared in her head. All the things she'd wanted to say to make David understand the damage he'd done. But standing in her successful business, planning a foundation that would change lives, living with a man who actually valued her, she realized she didn't need David to understand anything. His understanding or lack thereof had no bearing on her worth or her life. David, I accept your apology. Not because it changes anything, but because holding on to anger about you is taking up space in my life I'd rather use for better things. I hope you learn from this. I hope you become someone who builds people up instead of tearing them down. I hope your next relationship is healthier because you've done the work to be healthier. Thank you. That's more grace than I deserve. It's not for you. It's for me. This is me closing this chapter completely. You were part of my story, but you're not part of my present or my future. I wish you well, David. I genuinely do. But I don't want to hear from you again. Okay. Goodbye, Elena. And congratulations on everything you've built. She hung up and immediately blocked the number he'd called from. That evening, she told Richard about the call over dinner. How do you feel? He asked. Free. Completely free. For the first time since I met him, I don't feel any attachment. Not anger, not hurt, not even curiosity about his life. He's just someone I used to know, someone I learned from, but not someone who has any power over me anymore. That's closure. That's healing. Later that night, as they sat on their balcony watching the city lights, Richard said, I have another question to ask you. Okay. Move to the bedroom. I have something to show you there. Elena laughed. That's not a question. That's a command. Humor me. They went to the bedroom, and Richard opened the closet, pulling out a small box from the top shelf. Richard, if this is what I think it is. Just look. She opened the box to find not a ring, but a key on a simple silver chain. What is this? It's a key to this loft. Your name is already on the lease, but I wanted to give you an actual key as a symbol. This is your home, Elena. Not my home that you're living in. Our home that we're building together. Equal partnership. Equal say. Equal ownership of the space and the life we're creating. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. You know I already have a key, but you've never put it on a keychain. You keep it loose in your bag like you're not quite sure this is permanent. Like you might need to leave at any moment. I wanted you to have a key you could wear. A reminder that this is your home. That you belong here. That I'm not going to suddenly decide you're not enough and throw you out. She put the chain around her neck, feeling the weight of the key against her heart. I love you, she whispered. Not because you saved me. Not because you validated me. But because you see me. Really see me. All of me. And you choose that person every day. I love you too. And Elena? When I'm ready to propose, if that's something you'd even want, I promise it won't be a surprise. It'll be a conversation we have together. A choice we make together. Because that's what actual partnership looks like. When you're ready? Richard smiled. I've been carrying a ring around for 3 months. But I wanted to wait until you were completely free of David. Until there was no shadow of the past hanging over our future. Until you knew, without any doubt, that I'm choosing you for you. Not as a rebound or a rescue mission. You have a ring? In my briefcase at the office. Waiting for the right moment. But there's no rush. We have time. We have our whole lives. Elena kissed him, and in that kiss was every promise she'd never been able to make to David. Promises built on truth instead of performance. On choosing instead of settling. On partnership instead of servitude. I'm ready, she said against his lips. Whenever you are, I'm ready to build a life with you. To choose each other. To create something real and lasting and honest. Then let's do that. Let's build something beautiful. And standing in their bedroom, in the home they'd created together, wearing a key against her heart that symbolized belonging and commitment and equal partnership, Elena Martinez felt something she'd never felt in 9 years of marriage to David. Peace. Complete, absolute peace. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. You can't build a life with someone until you've built a life for yourself. You can't give yourself away to someone else and expect to feel whole. You can't make yourself small to fit someone else's expectations and expect to feel fulfilled. You have to choose yourself first. Build yourself first. Know yourself first. And then, only then, can you invite someone else to join you in the life you've created. Not to complete you, not to save you, not to define you, but to walk beside you. As equals, as partners, as two whole people choosing to build something together that's greater than either could create alone. That was love. Real love. The kind worth waiting for. The kind worth fighting for. The kind worth becoming your best self to deserve. And Elena Martinez had finally found it. Not because Richard had given it to her, but because she'd built herself into someone capable of receiving it. 2 years after being thrown out by a husband who told her no man would ever want her, Elena Martinez had built a successful design business from nothing, helped dozens of women through Haven's job readiness program find employment and stability, co-founded a foundation that would impact thousands of lives, rebuilt relationships with her family, created a circle of genuine friends who valued her for who she was, found a partnership based on respect, honesty, and mutual growth. Most importantly, discovered that her worth was never dependent on someone else's ability to see it. David Torres had been wrong. Catastrophically, completely wrong. Not just about Elena, but about what made someone valuable. About what partnership meant. About what love required. And his wrongness, his cruelty, his dismissal had accidentally set Elena free. Free to discover who she actually was. Free to build something authentic. Free to choose herself. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually a gift in disguise. Not because the pain doesn't matter. Not because the damage isn't real. But because it forces you to rebuild yourself into someone stronger, wiser, more authentic than you could have become without the breaking. Elena had been broken. Thoroughly, devastatingly broken. And from those broken pieces, she'd built something extraordinary. Not despite the breaking. Because of it. That was the real story. Not revenge. Not proving someone wrong. Not even finding love again. The real story was a woman who chose herself. Who stood up from rock bottom and built a foundation strong enough to support the life she deserved. Who learned that being thrown away by someone who couldn't see your worth was actually a blessing that freed you to find people who could. David had said no man would ever want her. He'd been wrong. But even if he'd been right, Elena had learned the most important truth of all. Being wanted was never the point. Being whole was the point. And she was whole, complete, valuable, worthy, exactly as she was. And that was everything. This is Boundless Love Tales, where we tell stories that remind you who you are when the world tries to tell you who you should be. Until next time, remember, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. And you, my friend, are capable of becoming absolutely extraordinary. See you in the next story.